Welcome to this edition of the B2B Engagement Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about building trust in the buyer's journey through effective value storytelling. And we are very fortunate to have with us Cordula Knüppel, Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for Western Europe at Ericsson. And we'd like to start by welcoming you, Cordula, and asking you to tell us a little bit about what you do now and also how your career has progressed to the point where you're now leading marketing and communications for one of the world's leading information technology companies.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure to be here in the podcast today. And I'm really looking forward for this conversation we're having. And when you just asked that question, how did I start my career? When I was a kid, I was looking at the commercials and I was like very touched by commercials. And so I really wanted to go into marketing. It changed between, but then I came back and I studied business administration, focusing on marketing, technology and innovation management and psychology, really to see the different angles of it and already put the first step into this technology field by my studies. After that, I went to General Electric and various job roles, various businesses. I started actually in the energy field of GE, went then to a GGO organization for pulling in GE's brand into Germany and how we make GE big that time in Germany. And then I went into the digital business of GE when we launched products and had lots of customer engagements that time already. I changed to a medium-sized company into an automation and robotics field, which was super interesting as well, because then I was responsible for building up a marketing and communications department. And that led me into Ericsson. And so my daily job is really lots about collaboration and thinking about go-to-market strategies. We collaborate obviously with the global team, with the Europe and Latin America team lots, and think about the localization and the activation of it. And this is something I really find inspiring, the evolvement of marketing and communication over the last years, obviously also connected to the pandemic, but even before that, there's so much change in the mindset of marketeers today. And that is something what is driving me every day.
Well, it's really interesting, and you used the word inspiring. It is inspiring to listen to the educational process of the foundations of what really good marketing is all about, from understanding the principles of communication and strategy to really focusing on psychology and the human aspect of how people think and what motivates them. Yeah. And I think for excellent marketers, it's really a blend of different disciplines that enable successful strategy and execution in this field. And I'm very interested in what you talked about, this evolution through the pandemic to where we are today, because one of the things that I'm not sure is well understood, especially in the technology industry where companies are very product and technology centric, it's not clear to me that a lot of senior executives really do understand what marketing is. And have you experienced this where certain companies or teams perceive marketing to be much more tactical than what you know it to be?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And this is also the reason why I said lots of my time I do stakeholder management to think about who am I talking to and what is their background and what do they understand about the buyer journey in terms of how we can help. If we think about the sales teams, they focus on this buyer journey, but how and where can marketing and communications come in with new ways of working, with new ideas, with innovative concepts and strategies on how to help them and together go to the market. And the human aspect is super important in that field because it's all about collaboration. Marketing, was received as a function doing events or doing advertisements or doing great commercials. Today, it's a bit, and especially in B2B business, it's much broader. It's really to understand the market, to understand the customer, the various functions of the customer, the partners, the industry. So really having a broad mindset here on different target groups and personas who we are marketing to. So that would be the external world. But if we think about the internal world, definitely we see a change into education of what we can do, what we can face today and what we can drive today, what we can drive together. Ericsson is a matrix organization, lots of businesses, lots of teams, and It's super important to collaborate. If we think about IPR teams, what do they have in mind and how can we collaborate with them to go to market or help them to position something? Or the people team, if we think about employer marketing or employer branding, we all want to grow and we want to bring the best talents in. So how do we do this in collaboration with the people team? So therefore, it's not an event, but really like a long time planning and collaboration.
I think it's very interesting that you've talked about collaboration internally and externally, because certainly in the world of B2B technology companies, for sure, there's an ecosystem that formulates solutions. It's very seldom just one company that solves the entire range of problems for a customer set. And I think that you've thought through, from a strategy point of view, a lot of what companies are still struggling with, which is how to lead internal teams to change their mindset from thinking about us and then communicating about us to starting by thinking about the customer and then communicating about the customer. And be very interested in hearing a little bit about some of the journeys that you've been through and the perhaps challenges that you've had to overcome or learnings that you've created within your organization to achieve that customer-centric perspective.
Absolutely. I think it's very important to educate my peers on what we are able to do. For example, the sales team is very often asking for an event. But this event is not just one touch point with the customer. You really have to think that in a broader sense. Why are we doing this event? Where is it? Where will it be? Who is going to be there? Who's the target group? Why should they come? How do we invite them? Depending on the format, obviously, but where we really could use not that one touch point, but various thoughts about the strategy. How do we engage with the customer? How do we collaborate with the customer and bring in also their thoughts, listen to the customer and listen to the market? What do they need? Coming back to the internal salesperson, that they understand that this is not about one event, but about the entire customer journey, and maximize this one visible piece of marketing into long-term engagement. Could we use the different assets in various ways on different channels to different audiences? How do we tell the story about it?
I think a lot of perception in B2B marketing was that marketing's job used to be, or was perceived at least to be, lead generation and then conducting one-off events and other episodes. They were very episodic in the process. And you've talked now about something that's a real paradigm shift, which is a continuum of engagement. It's a continuous process. It doesn't stop and start. It's there all the time. You mentioned different channels, people using different channels to do this kind of advocacy and learning and education. And then you also talked about something that I think is becoming more and more important in this process, which is how to tell the right stories at every one of these touch points, because the selling process has been transformed from us telling people things to them relating to our solutions or our infrastructure or at some point our products. But that relatability has got to find some emotional connection. It can't just be about analytical features and functions and technical aspects. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about the importance of storytelling in what might have been an anathema earlier, which is B2B and B2B technology. Nobody would have thought of storytelling as being sort of a critical component of what we need to do. But I think you've proved the opposite, right? It is so important.
Storytelling is crucial. And it's not only the story I as a marketeer would tell, it's also people who are telling the story within the company to their connections, to their network, in their way, in their language. And it's not only, the marketeer eyes who can tell a story. It should be really the different stakeholders connecting to that one engagement, what you do, to tell the story through their eyes, because with that, you get a much bigger audience and you get really connected to so many more listeners. Because if you read something from a marketeer or from a company channel, well, the chances that you scroll is definitely there.
it's become harder and harder these days to create that trust for two reasons, I think. There's lots and lots of channels. We're now up to 8 or 9 channels of communication and engagement. So some of it is less personal. And then the second part of that is that there's so many more people involved in buying decisions, particularly large infrastructure decisions and complex technologies.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to relate, as you said, from their eyes, but also for relevant value to them. So this storytelling has become more complicated because the story, as you said, that I tell or that you might tell would resonate with certain constituents in certain channels, not with everybody. So how has that sort of complexity affected the way that you have to construct both the content creation and also the way that you think about channels of communication as well?
Goes back to the education. Really educate also the stakeholders, the peers around me, to see the benefit if they tell the story. And then from a storytelling perspective, obviously, sometimes they struggle. The one or the other is, a natural storyteller. The other might struggle a bit and need some guidance on how to tell a story. But it's super important also to learn and give a little bit of a structure. What is the big picture? What is the learning? Who's your target group? It doesn't make sense to give a story to a person who's not connected to the topic. It must be something you believe in.
I think that has become so much more important in the B2B world than it used to. We think about storytelling in commercials or in B2C, and it's fairly obvious how people can connect. That's my life. Looks like my neighborhood. This looks like my car. I get that. But when you're in the B2B world, because things have become so much more complicated, finding how to relate to different personas and audiences has become, I think, a real talent and a skill. And this is where I think there's been a lot of learning about how to make connections work in B2B, is to blend the emotional connections with the technical connections and the analytical decisions, because what we found is people, even in B2B situations, making large purchase decisions or large project decisions, they make a lot of decisions, or most of the decisions that we all make are heavily influenced by emotions. And we don't think about it this way. We think about, well, if we put our ROI data together correctly, we'll be fine. And if we put our technical throughput data and redundancy data together, then that's how people are going to make the decisions. But what we found, and I think this is where your background in psychology and human behavior is so important, is people will make decisions based on some of those data, but at the end of the day, they're thinking about emotional factors, risk, for example. How much risk do we want to take? How much risk do I want to take in my career, in my position? Or maybe fear, or maybe a spirit of innovation. Maybe there's risk takers. There are people who are more innovative. So I think that this combination of understanding human behavior and motivation, and then being very expert in these different channel technologies and capabilities, this has become one of the keys to being able to be effective in storytelling and in customer-centric communications and marketing in general.
Absolutely. And it's coming back to what we said also at the beginning about the human-centric. In every organization, there's a human being making the decision, what you just said. And this human being, even if we have AI helping from a marketing and comms perspective, massively to simplify processes or to create some assets for us with artificial intelligence or writing some text pieces. But at the end, the decision maker is a human being. What is he or she connected to? How is this person influenced? And then coming back to something what you also mentioned in another podcast about how much screen time we have and how long are we able to focus on something and how fast we get distracted.
Yeah.
How can we bring a message to a person who probably sees it and after milliseconds he decides or she decides that's important? This is also something like really going into an emotional connection to the other person who's the receiver of the message, where whatever channel it is, however you perform it, that is something to know the other person is a human being, and how can we in milliseconds get their attention that high that they will stay and read through it.
Well, that's a big challenge, but I think to address the current and future trends in the way that people are overloaded with messages, we've got to be much less generic and much more personalized, but also I think much more selective in the way that we connect with prospects, because they are looking for much more control in the process of how they connect with us. How are they finding us? How are they finding you? And how are they doing their own research? And how do you create experiences for them to, in a digital world, learn about you without you being in contact with them directly? So what are the things that you and Ericsson are doing to create a digital footprint so that customers can find out about you, can learn at their own pace, and explore and understand for each of these different personas as part of those multiple channels, that experience for them, so that at some point, either when they get a communication from you or when they then decide they would like to connect with you on their own, that next step makes sense to them. So what is the sort of the world of content and experiences that you're creating for people so that they can do a lot of this exploration on their own?
It's definitely in various channels, thinking first about targeted campaigns in LinkedIn, thinking about really the different audiences, what I mentioned a few of earlier, going into targeted messaging on these social media channels. And then we really want to grow and have in our strategy to go into more advocacy and collaboration with the customer. For example, we, together with Deutsche Telekom and Vonage is an American company which Ericsson bought recently, we are thinking together with Deutsche Telekom and Vonage and Ericsson, how can we market the product Magenta Business API? So what can we do? Where can we be? For example, Mobile World Congress is in Barcelona, is one of the biggest telco fair in the world. So how is the appearance there? Who is going to tell the story? With which assets? Does it need to be slide work? Does it need to be a video? Best case would be actually a customer reference story about the product, about the solution, about how the customer is using that solution.
Yes, I think what's interesting is that you think about this in a highly focused way, because you're not, first of all, you're not a consumer company, you're a business company, but you also have a very limited number of customers and prospects, right? So it's not thousands, it's tens.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
And so the challenge that you've outlined is that they're going to experience you in a highly defined world of channels and venues. And so for you, it's about optimizing those venues, understanding all of the different personas who are going to participate or be exposed to those venues, and thinking about what messages are going to resonate the most with them. And I think that's part of this complexity, because at certain times it may be the right message, but it's not the right time for the customer.
Opening. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that there's what I'm hearing from you is that there's a lot of different levers to pull and a lot of different capabilities, but you have to really orchestrate them very well. It's almost like you didn't say this, but I think of you a little bit more as an orchestra conductor, where you have so many different instruments available to you that can either create harmonious music and resonate, but that each audience member is going to perceive differently, right? To them, they're going to hear that music in the context of their lives, and it's going to mean something different to each one of them. Your challenge is making sure that you're expressing the right melody and tone and volume at the right time. So you really have to understand that audience. And because it's so specific, you can't just put out a playlist and say it's going to work. It's got to be very, very custom for each one of them, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting what you said before, and I absolutely agree with this orchestra. But what helps in that field is, again, artificial intelligence. And it will come so much more next year and in the coming years into our daily life on how for example, you mentioned that earlier, that you said traditional marketeers would maybe say, this is too time consuming. We need one-to-many.
Right.
But with AI, we can do this within seconds or minutes, even to adapt the message for another audience. So it is actually possible. And this orchestration is something what is, and I love that word, by the way, to name it as an orchestra, and with the different tones and different songs and different, what comes out of it. And another part, what I think is crucial, the time. Absolutely. There's one time a year, there's this MWC. It's clearly that we need to squeeze that long through the year and not have one engagement. This is the visible engagement, but then what is the invisible behind it and below it, above it, around it?
Yeah. And I think this is possibly where we can bring together all of these lessons that you've learned and that you've taught, which is to think about the customer as a group of human beings who are collectively making a decision on behalf of their company, but they're bringing their own experiences and emotions to the table each time we're asking them to make these decisions. I think that you've formulated both a foundational experience in all of these different disciplines, but also a career building experience in understanding customers and markets and being able to orchestrate these together to really solve this very, very complex problem of multiple channels, multiple audiences, and multiple technologies. So I'm very appreciative that you shared these experiences and insights with the audience. I want to thank you so much for your time, Cordula, and your authenticity in this process.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.